this last video, I will discuss some additional components to scenario making. Up to this point, we've covered mostly isolated scenarios, be it for speed regulation, collision detection, or message prompts. This video will explain how you can bring all of those elements into a single scenario, or how scenarios themselves can be embedded into each other to layer some complex and comprehensive situations. Right off the bat, you can see that the scene is slightly different, including new lampposts. And as we open up the plan view, you can see additional waypoints that have been added as well. These new components will all be used for the scenarios that I'll be showing you next. So we're just going to start by playing the scenario that's been created. If you look at the drop-down list, there's now a file called chain start. You should also see the like name, chain bike, chain car, chain gate check, and chain restructure. These all work together for what I'm about to show you, but we use chain start to initiate the entire chain process. You should also see the original tutorial scenarios that we created earlier. So choose chain start and hit play. Immediately we're shown a video that gives us some basic directions for what we're doing, going from start to finish. And then we're given our information on speed limits. We have speed regulation just like we did before, and we've set it to 60 kilometers per hour. Up here you should see the familiar bike that we've had, as well as a crash warning. Since we've crashed, we'll also be told that the scenario event has failed. Up ahead you'll see some car models, and these will be used for another event in the scenario. We're told to hit all of the gates as well as avoid the cars. As we hit the gates, we can see a check mark on screen, and we're also given an audio cue that we've hit them. Let's hit the cars just to see that it's also a trigger. We hit the gate in the process too, so we see another check mark. As you can see, the buildings are changing and some of the elements in the scene are adjusting as well. I call this restructuring, and what this has done is altering the context for not only weather, but we've also launched command prompts for models in the scene. See, it changes to snow. And back to sunlight. And then we're shown an image as well as an audio cue to show that we finished the scenario. Now that we've run through this scenario once, let's try and recall some of the things that we've seen. Right off the bat, we were shown a video that gives the basic instructions for what we're supposed to be doing in this scenario. As we moved ahead, we were shown a familiar bike scenario with collision detection, but then given information as to whether or not we passed the event successfully. After that, we were introduced to some moving car models, as well as some moving gate objects, and shifting of buildings and trees and the lampposts. The weather also changed, and several other things happened as well that we did not see, including return points for wrong turns. As we start to try and understand what happened in this scene, we need to open up the scenario manager and then start looking through that. Before continuing with the breakdown of the scenario we've just ridden through, I want to explain the best way how to learn how to do scenarios. Sure, you can watch these videos, but one of the most effective ways to learn is by studying files themselves with scenarios constructed. You should drive through them, as well as look at the way they're structured in the scenario editor and scenario manager. Included with the files that are used for this scenario tutorial, you can download additional files with scenarios directly from the Forum 8 server by going to File and choosing Download. In this list, choose Include Scenarios, and you can see a list of about 8 of them that are here. So that's a way that you can study them and get more information on how to construct them, using alternative methods for structuring and events and conditions. So let's proceed by opening up the scenario manager. Go to Edit, choose Edit Scenario. Now you can see the 5 chain of scenarios listed. As you watched, you can see different events happening, and the way that was accomplished is by using embedded scenarios, and these are all launched using the chain start event, or chain start scenario. So let's choose that and then click on Edit to see what's happening. Right off the bat, we can see a very complex scenario here, and if you recall the Type 1 and Type 2 scenarios that we were discussing in the second video, we can actually see that both of those types of structures are happening in this. We can see that the independent events are happening throughout the top, and then some sequential events happening here for things like the gate passes and the barricades, which we actually did not see in this past run through. So let's start by opening up the starting event. click on Edit, and then we can see that a vehicle is launched like normal. But from there, we click on the Multimedia Models tab, and then under Model Type, we can see that a video model was used. If you recall, that's simply just this video here with the arrow crossing this scene. Click OK. So it's fairly basic. And let's start to break down the exits. We have our speeding condition, which is very similar to what we've used in the past and runs through the entirety of the scenarios. But as we look at exit 2, 3, and 4, they are corresponding exits to events that actually are not in this specific scenario. What they do is launch the other scenarios that we saw listed previously. So, with chain bike in mind, let's click Cancel, and then choose Chain Bike and open up this scenario. Taking a look at this, it's a very simple situation that we have. A bike is launched, and then we're told to avoid crashing into it. Just like before, we have a message pop up to say if we did crash into it, as well as if we pass the event successfully. Now let's go back to chain start. Looking at chain car, it's actually launched using a different type of condition called road 1. And the reason this is done is because when you want cars on the road, they need to be starting with the start of the scenario. And because our car is already on road 1, it means chain car is activated instantly with this scenario. So let's click OK and then choose chain car. You can see that I've named the starting event to actually initiation, which is the initiation event for this specific scenario. But then as we look at start, we can see that the cars are actually in the starting event like normal, and they have the option visible on screen. Just like in the bike event, we have a simple crash and collision detection. And let's go to chain start again, then chain gate check. This is actually a bit strange because we've divided the events between a scenario and the starting chain scenario. So let's look at gate check. And then we can see it's just two events. Start, which has a command execution, and what this is tells the gate objects in the scene to start to flash, and we click OK to close, and then here's the multimedia information. We have our check mark. Just wait a second while this loads. And you can also see the sound model with its duration. So click cancel, cancel again. What you don't see in this is a collision detection. That's actually handled in the chain start event. And the way this is done is sequentially. So we see exit 5 here. After you hit the first one, it goes to the gate pass 1, and then so on. Along this, we also have a gate miss, and what this does is, if you miss any of the gates, by the time you hit the 700 meter waypoint, you'll get a message saying that you did not hit all of them. Pretty simple. As we continue with the chain start scenario, let's take a look at the next exit, which is barricades INIT, or barricades initiate. While we did not see the barricades reset our cars because we did not make a wrong turn, I'll explain the way this works. We use again the exit condition road or on road, and using road 1, this means that the barricade initiate exit is activated as soon as the scenario starts. And the reason we do this is just so we can have it flow directly into these three while being an independent event entirely. So as we look from here, we have barricades 1, 2, and 3, and these correspond to the 3 different intersections in our scene. So barricades 1, the collision objects are the 2 initial barricades, and then for barricades 2 are the next 2, and then barricades 3 are the next 2. The reason we have to use 3 separate exits is because we don't want them all to go back to the same launch point. So as we click on exit or edit for barricades 1, we can see that it resets to 175. For barricades 2, it resets to 460, and for barricades 3 it resets to 710, each of these just before the intersection. Now the reason we want these to exit back to barricades initiate is because we want those to reset themselves and be available to hit again in the case that you make a wrong turn a second, third, or any number of times. Okay, so let's actually run through this. Let's click close, and then just click on the chain start again. We see our video again, we can ignore it and just hit the gas. We'll then show our speed prompt, and we'll see the bike rider again. We'll just ignore all of this and make a wrong turn. See our crash message. Now let's hit the barricade. We're reset like normal. Let's just try this again, but turning the other way. And as we can see, the reset function works. Let's proceed a little bit faster and then try and hit the second barricade. We see our speed limit information. The gates pop up. Again, we can ignore all of this, because our goal is to see what happens with wrong turns. Let's turn once more. It resets just before that. So, like the previous scenario tutorial, we can see that we can reset the wrong turn exits as many times as necessary to drive through properly. Now let's open up the scenario editor again, choose chain start, and let's look at some of the later exits, which are chain restructure and chain houses down. Let's immediately close that, go to chain restructure, and choose edit. What we have here are just some of the buildings shifting, and these are done using a command execution. We see the models selected in the list, and then the commands that correspond to those. So it's houses down, then going to the tower events, we can see towers up. Now the way that I've done this, exits are just using temporal conditions, so they kind of stagger onto the scene and creates a different effect. Let's look at the first event, and we see Towers 1 and Context 2. Context is something we've not talked about, but it's very important to achieving what we saw here, mainly for weather, as well as switching some of the model visibility layers. Now, let's close this out, and go to Edit, and edit Context. Context was introduced in a later version of UC Winroad, and what it does is allow entire scene situations to be saved, and those are called contexts. So this scenario, or actually this entire file, uses about 9 of these. As you look through the list for each of these, you can see the different options that are selected, everything from traffic generators to visual options. Weather actually is done by using 5 different contexts for the different type of rain density, as well as simply fog and snow. As we go back to our scenario and choose chain restructure and look at these later situations here, we can see in the others tab in the event editor that the contexts are chosen. And I've just staggered these like I did the command execution by using temporal conditions. So what we have are the building shifting as well as the context, which shifts the weather and other types of things. So let's just run through that once more so we can see everything happening again. The video's playing just as it should, then we're given the speed information. Let's avoid hitting the bike this time, so we'll hit my brakes and let him pass by. But we'll make a wrong turn. As we continue driving, we'll be told that the event passed because we did not hit the bike. It's independent from the barricade situation. We see the gates pop up and they're moving objects. We see the message information and all of the other things that are supposed to happen in the scene. As we hit this later part, the buildings move down and the context starts to shift as it should. And we can see that everything is working together, even the speed limit information. So additional cars are up here, and let's just make a wrong turn to see that our barricade information still works. And it does. So that wraps up the basic information for this complex scenario. And again, the most effective way to understanding how these are done is by simply studying the file. Study the waypoints that are created, study the events and their exit condition. Do this for many different files and you'll start to get a much more solid understanding of how these are created. This is very much a trial and error process as you start to learn scenarios, but you'll get faster as you continue to make more and more. And this wraps up the fourth and final video in the scenario making tutorial series. I know it was fast, but it was mainly geared at expanding upon the information we covered in the previous videos to show some advanced options and alternatives to what we've already done. Even at this point, we've still not covered everything the scenario editor can do, but I hope that you have gained a better understanding into the things that can be accomplished with it. To recap this video, the topics covered included embedding scenarios and combining structure types, additional multimedia models including video, sound, and images, additional event exit conditions including on-road, additional moving models including the cars, command execution for moving objects including the gates and the buildings, context switching and editing for weather, visibility layers, and more, and basically how everything can work together for comprehensive situations. And again, the most effective way to learn is by studying samples. You can go to File and Download from UC Winroad and browse the Forum 8 database and download them directly.